I'm Derek Wheatley, and welcome to episode 92 of the Wheatley podcast. As always, thank you very much for joining us, whether it's on YouTube or it's on the podcast platforms. If you would subscribe to our YouTube channel, that would be very helpful. I want to say thanks to Egrain for coming on last week to talk about all things Halloween and horror, and it was nice to do a Halloween special and kind of let rip on some horror films I like to watch around this time of the year. This is the great thing about this podcast. It can move from one theme to another seamlessly. But thanks for your support. My guest this week was a surgeon and a Sandplay therapist, and his name is Brendan Harding. How are you doing, Brendan?
Good, thanks, Derek. Thanks for the invitation to be on your show.
Absolutely. I'm delighted to have you on. Actually, we're gonna speak a lot about Sandplay therapy because we had a guest on recently who talked about it, and it was something that I wasn't overly familiar with. So it's great to have you on. So to start, then, could you give us a short history of your upbringing, please?
Well, I was born in Dublin, but raised in Cavan, and I had one brother who's you might know, and Michael. He's pretty well known. Nothing major in our childhood, really. What was the question you asked me? Sorry.
Just a short history of your upbringing.
I went to secondary school in Pat's Cavan.
Okay.
And then decided to do medicine for one reason or another. I think part of it was, well, I won't go into too much, but anyway, I did it. I suppose I first became involved with mental health when I was working in a Dublin teaching hospital for a very unconscious boss who was a very wounded man, really.
All right.
So I didn't understand that at the time. And it got to the stage where I just couldn't take it anymore and I was going to leave. And my brother suggested I see someone, just talk to someone about it before I actually walk out.
Yeah.
And I met this guy called Michael Paul Gallagher, and it was a lovely experience with him. And he directed me to a place called the Senegal Retreat House in Dublin. It was run by a crowd of nuns called the Sisters of the Senegal. And the first weekend there, we did a weekend workshop, which this guy, Michael Paul Gallagher, recommended. And it was fully human, fully alive, based on the work of a fellow called John Powell, who at the time was very popular. Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am is one of his other books.
All right.
They were small books, but they were a real introduction to an emotional world, which I really, in the training in medicine, there was no training whatsoever about anything like that. So it was really quite an eye-opener to hear everybody talking about people's emotions, if you like, and how they felt. And then when I was at that weekend, excuse me, they had talked about an upcoming weekend in a couple of months' time that was the Myers-Briggs. And the Myers-Briggs is a way of looking at personality. It's the basis of all the personality tests you come across, really. And it's a lovely way of looking at the psyche. But during that weekend, it's mainly based on Jung's work, Carl Jung. And so I became familiar with Carl Jung's ideas. And then I kind of pursued that. I got into psychosynthesis for a while in Dublin, and my sort of career path took me out of the country, away from all this, which was kind of disappointing at the time. But I connected on one of my trips home to Ireland to see someone I knew who was sick. I was living in Saudi Arabia at the time. I met a social worker when passing through Castlebar, and she told me about Sandplay. And I said to her, are you saying that if you move things around in a tray of sand, it affects the way you think? And she said, well, sort of, yeah. No, it's not really like that, but it is in a way. At a superficial level, that's true. And then as it happened, next place I was in Canada working, and I got in contact with the lady who used to come over to Ireland to teach this woman, Roisin, who was a social worker, to teach her how to use Sandplay with children. she actually lived in the States, and I asked if I could come and see her because it sounded so interesting. I was really interested in Jung at this stage. I'd read a lot, but hadn't experienced anything. And she said I could come down to meet her in Rhode Island for a whole weekend. So this is a big deal for me to go off to this place in Rhode Island for a weekend. What was going to happen? I had no idea, really. And it turned out to be the most important adventure I've had, really, because the whole thing, the psyche opened up that weekend. What I had read about as theoretically became a reality that weekend.
I wanted to just ask you, I suppose, because we'll always drift back towards mental health stuff in the chat, but as someone who was a surgeon, how, as that job goes, how difficult is it with regards to mental health, with the amount of stress I would imagine that's involved?
That's a good question, really. I suppose you'd say it mightn't be the most conscious. There's an attitude, I think, with people that, well, if you're a surgeon, you can't possibly connect with others. You have to do your job and not take into account how people might be feeling about it.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that, though. I think once, it's a great privilege to be a surgeon, and maybe there isn't enough energy around that, because you meet someone and they're going to agree that you can open their belly or something. They're literally placing their life in your hands, and so you are very privileged to be given that responsibility.
Yeah.
And so it's a very rich profession at that level. Surgeons aren't noted for getting depressed that I know of, but the medical profession in general, people do get depressed, if you like to call it that.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll have a talk about that later, maybe, about depression, but I think you don't go into surgery unless you have at some level the capacity to deal with it.
Yeah.
And you also get exposed to it very gradually. I remember the first operation I was at, that it was an appendix, and I was really nervous about it. And they wall off, with the drapes, you have this little corner of skin that you can see. You press this knife into the skin and it turns red. It doesn't even look like blood, and you go on from there. And it's also protected.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you still would not sometimes feel disturbed if you have to go to the emergency room to deal with an accident.
Yeah, and I suppose I think of certain jobs in a way of being very, and I don't include someone who's a surgeon as this, but something that can be quite mechanical, where it's doesn't take a lot of thought process. So if it's something that on a production line or something we're going through, you're doing the same thing over and over. Is there ever fear, or is this a ridiculous idea, that something, if you're doing, taking an appendix out every day, for instance, that it does become mechanical and that you can lose some sort of focus?
Absolutely, Derek.
Yeah. Okay.
You need to watch that.
Yeah.
I remember one case I had. It was a very the lady was on anticoagulants, so we had to watch her get her anticoagulation back sort of towards normal, or nearly normal. And I remember being quite tense about it. And we got through the operation fine, closing up, a big sense of relief that everything had gone well. And in that relieved kind of not paying attention, I nicked her bow, not realizing I did.
Yeah.
And we had a problem after the operation with it. It did get sorted, but it was such a good lesson to me, the wrong way to learn it, but that's some of the learning is like that. And to be very careful when you come to the end of an operation, especially if it's been difficult. Everybody tends to relax. And in those just when you're closing up, you could make a mistake. Exactly, what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You have to pay attention to every piece you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned depression there, and I watched a video you have up and it starts with depression is not an illness. Can you maybe speak on that a little?
Yeah. Well, one of the Four Noble Truths, I think it might be the first noble truth of Buddhism, is there is suffering in life. And I first came across that statement in a book called The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck, if you might have heard of it. And so there is suffering in life. And when people are described as being depressed, they're suffering, in my opinion. And they're suffering about something in their life that they cannot see, maybe.
Yeah.
It's too painful to talk about, and they can't articulate it. And when you engage with a therapist, or even a friend or a spiritual advisor, and you have a space that is protected with that person, and that they understand and they're not judging or anything like that, you, over a period of time, maybe not at the very beginning, but over a few times talking to that person, you will eventually be able to speak about something you haven't been able to speak about before. Yeah. And that's the crux. And I know it from my own experience, because in the last, say, 30 years since I started this work, when I would get into difficulties, if you like, you might call them mental health difficulties, I wouldn't call them that. They're periods of suffering. And I knew that I would be described as depressed. I felt depressed, but I would say I'm suffering and there's something in this for me to learn, and I would learn it. And as I got older, these, if you want to call them periods of suffering, they'd get less because I would get the message sooner,
Yeah. So would you say that you build up a kind of a resilience? Is that the wrong word, maybe?
No, it's the wrong word, I think.
Yeah.
You build up a capacity to feel things.
Yeah.
For instance, you could talk to someone and say, sometimes I might talk about resentment as being one unconscious emotion that people have. And people might say to you, well, I don't feel resentment. And that's probably not true. Most people would have a bit of resentment somewhere. The thing is, Derek, that if you feel resentment, you suffer.
Yeah.
It's not a nice thing to feel. You don't even like to admit to yourself that you feel it. But when you do acknowledge it, then you don't act out of it.
Yeah.
And you'll know that I resent this person. You suffer it, and then you don't do something unconsciously negative to them.
Yeah.
You own your resentment. Whereas if you don't see it, you're not going to treat that person fairly.
Yeah.
And this goes with all emotion. I remember one client who, she had a dream of a green dragon. And she realized the green was, for her, envy. And she realized that, and this was a big thing in her dream, and it was a big thing in her life. And she realized that she envied so many people. And when she owned it and saw it and knew it, well, that's just envy.
Yeah.
And then let it go. And her life changed on that one thing.
I think a lot of people could relate to that as well. Like, even just using the way you've used envy and resentment as two things, such powerful things that really eat away at you. Yeah. And we've all kind of been there at some point, those kind of a particular person, for whatever reason, you envy them and you find it. And it is very difficult to let it go, I think, especially if that person is within your life,
Yes. But you'll never let it go if you don't acknowledge it, and acknowledging it. And that's the courage you need to acknowledge these things in yourself. If I acknowledge this envy and then I really have to acknowledge it and feel it, will I let go of it? The thing is, you will. Yeah. You definitely will. It might take longer than you think, but it could also, like in the case of that woman, she let go of it immediately.
Yeah. Brendan, just give us 2 seconds. All right. I'm just going to read out an advert and then we're going to get into some Sandplay therapy. So,
okay.
Fusion Training Center, Monksland Athlone, a place to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, martial arts, and CrossFit. A great place to experience coaches, a great atmosphere with experienced coaches and a real sense of community. If you want to join the team, find us on Facebook at Fusion Training Center or drop in for a chat. Fusion Training Center, train like a warrior. We're all allowed mistakes now and again. So, Brendan, what is Sandplay therapy?
Could I just mention one thing? Yeah. Before we leave depression, or we might get back to it too.
Yeah.
But particularly this is a bit of a thing with me, in young people.
Yeah.
Who get depressed, they are told that they've got an illness, if you like, and they're suffering. And I don't see that many young people, but I do meet them. And in all of them, really, they're in a difficult life situation. It might be a relationship, it might be expectation of what they'd like to do in life, and that's not going to happen. These kind of things, they are very real. And once they kind of understand it and talk about it, their depression, in inverted commas, goes. And like, one of the things in our society that a lot of people talk about is the lack of initiation into adulthood. In the past, there were all sorts of rituals that people had, and in different cultures, different rituals as well. And if young people could understand, I know it might maybe a bit out there, but if they could understand that when something has gone wrong, they've lost someone that they were in love with, or their career expectations are going to take a different direction, or a parent has died, or it can be anything.
Yeah.
And so they suffer. And that this is their initiation into adulthood. Because when they go through that and realize that they've been through something, if you like, and when they come out the other side of it, they're richer, the personality has grown, and they're open to another aspect of life that they were not open to before. And so they know now, this is what suffering is like. This is what it is to move into the adult world. And when I encounter suffering again, I'll be able to deal with it. Do you know?
Yeah. Do you think that even just the term illness is a kind of a destructive idea anyway? But is it something also that this is what we think it is? You know, the depression is an illness. That's that. End of story. And you're saying the way you're thinking, or your thought process to it, would be a much more easier and open way for them to kind of an open approach for them to take.
Yeah. Like it's to get that. And like, it's been shown many times that depression, inverted commas, is more common in socially deprived areas. And in my experience, and in the experience of my own life, when I have been depressed, it has been because I've been suffering about something that's going on in my life that I couldn't sort of accept or cope with. Yeah.
Sorry.
And so for these young people, that sense of initiation, it could be so valuable to them that they understand, rather than that they've got an illness, that they're actually growing through this experience. And if people around them could treat them, acknowledge that they are in a difficult place, and not say to them, oh, you shouldn't be feeling that. Don't worry about it. It'll be okay. Forget it. Just acknowledge that they're in this space and help them through it. And I think that would be quite valuable for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something to take on board, and something different as well. I spoke to you just before this about the idea of presenting different ideas, and to get it out there that about many different mental health issues. So it's great to have you on to talk about that, and also to talk about Sandplay therapy. We were very lucky to hear about it recently. I know this is a very broad question. What is Sandplay therapy?
Okay. I'll show you if you like.
Absolutely.
I'll pick up the thing and I'll let you see it. Yeah. So this is a sand tray. So you'll know what I'm talking about. And I'll put my hand in there so you get a sense of the size of it.
Yeah.
And these are the symbols. And if we were to talk about this I think maybe a better way might be to say symbol therapy, if you like.
Right.
Because it's more about symbols than it is about the sound. And I'll just let you see the rest of the Sandplay room there. And go back to square one. And the idea is that we'll say I'm depressed and I go to see, we'll say, a therapist. And the therapist has looked at their unconscious, and the therapist has the capacity to hear me, to understand, to, if you like, to feel with me for whatever I'm talking about. So in this environment, which is confidential, I know it's going to be, I trust the guy I'm sitting with or the woman I'm sitting with, and I start talking to them. And just, this is with any therapy, gradually, I will talk about things that I have been unable to talk about before. And often the energy around this is shame. Now, it's not shame that I've done something bad, but actually shame that I feel so deeply about the loss of something. It could be the death of someone close to me, or the end of a relationship, or the fact that I'm being bullied, or many different things. But the shame comes from the sense that I shouldn't be feeling like this about this. And in classical Jungian analysis, the first step is actually called confession.
Okay.
Where you're actually acknowledging to someone that you have a problem and what's around. So in that space, I will gradually talk to that person, talk a bit more openly, and eventually I will talk my way to the point, the issue that's the real issue for me. And I can't look at that on my own because there's too much emotion associated with it. But when I'm in this space with this other person, the emotion is, if you like, shared. And so it's not as, it often comes up with, in my work, that someone will talk about the death of a parent, and it could be 20 years ago. And it is clear that at the time, the loss of that person was so intense for them that they couldn't experience it. Can you understand that?
Yeah.
The losses would just overwhelm them, so they don't experience it. And gradually over the space of a year, it gets pushed into the background and it's gone. And then they say to you, life would never be the same since I lost my mother or my father or my brother or sister. And it's because they have not dealt with the pain.
Yeah.
The right way, if you like, is to acknowledge the pain and to celebrate, because whatever has happened has happened. That's life. People die, you know. And if we are to lose our parents, they have held something for us. We have to acknowledge in ourselves what they held for us, because often there's a real sort of, if your parent held a lot for you of various positive qualities, you have to own these for yourself. And that's part of the struggle of dealing with the grief. But anyway, getting back to the Sandplay. So you're in this relationship with the person sitting on the chair, and you start talking about things that you don't normally talk to. You feel safe, you feel it's okay to share with this person. And then we'll say you decide to make a picture in the sand. Now, the idea here is that you look around the shelves and you see these lots and lots of objects from all over the place, representing everything. And symbols are the language of the unconscious. So the unconscious is driving you to make a picture in there to speak. So you're drawn to these objects, you put them in the tray, and the unconscious is putting out a story about what's going on in your unconscious. And you don't understand it at the time you do it. You just pick it. I'll pick this object because it's blue.
Yeah.
And with that object, I like this object. There'll be various reasons why you have put those particular objects in the tray, but it is a story from the unconscious. And the next thing you're going to ask me is about interpretation. And this is a really important thing. And the therapist doesn't interpret for two reasons. One of them is while I know a lot about what these symbols can mean, I don't know what it means for a particular person at a particular moment. And the same symbol could mean something different tomorrow. I will have a general idea. And when we look back at these things, it can be very clear what it's all about. But in this moment, I don't know really what it's fully about. And so if I was giving an opinion, I couldn't expect to be really accurate. And secondly, even if I did know exactly what it meant, why has the person put it out there in symbol form? It's because they're not ready to talk about it at the fully conscious level.
Right.
But once they have expressed it like this, the emotion of it is diffused, and they could come back the next week and they mightn't tell you exactly what they've done in the tray, but they'll be talking about what was done in the tray last week.
Okay.
Can you understand that?
Yeah. Why do you think people choose Sandplay therapy?
I don't know. I often thought, why did they not choose Sandplay therapy?
That's fair. And and I asked the question in kind of in a roundabout way because I mentioned to you before we hit record about I didn't know anything about any of these, types of therapies. I just knew one or two forms that we all know about and we've known about for years and years. And I didn't know about music and art and Sandplay. I didn't know any of them. And the thing about it, when I look at it now, these are the kind of things that I would have preferred to be doing because there's there's obviously a creative aspect with all of them in a way, but something like Sandplay would be fascinating I think for the person going in to find out just what it is. And when you talk about, I didn't think of it on the way you spoke of it there on the unconscious part, and we will talk about that, but the idea of the unconscious mind is picking these figures or symbols or whatever it might be because they're blue or whatever, and not knowing why they're doing it. That to me is it's just different. It's a different way of thinking about therapy, and it's really kind of, when you find out about these things, it's really exciting ways to think about therapy. So there's an idea that I really like, that the idea of a safe space in therapy, and we can see the people watching this on YouTube will see behind Brendan all that, that it's a beautiful space. We saw the sand tray, all those kind of things. How much do you think that helps the client?
I think it's essential. Yeah. And when I talked about the symbols, I just mentioned the sand because I kind of dismissed it there a bit. I really think that the sand, apart from the fact that it's amorphous and you can do anything with it, really, you can pull it back and show the blue underneath, and people use that to depict water beneath the sand. But it has a wonderful symbolic effect itself, because sand is the interface between the sea and land. Yeah. And the symbol that humanity has had to portray the unconscious throughout history is the sea, Great Mother. And one of the very commonly used sort of diagrams for the unconscious too is an iceberg. And that consciousness is the bit of the iceberg above the water. Yeah. And the unconscious, the rest of the iceberg, 90% of the iceberg is unconscious. And that's the way it is in our psyche. So once you start, like depression, inverted commas, depression can be the gateway to you looking at your own unconscious. Yeah. And that journey, like, I guess I went into it because I've been reading all about this. Could it be true? That was my attitude. Could this be true? And through this method and working with someone who had done a good bit of work, well, done a big amount of work on their own unconscious, that's really important. If I haven't done work on my unconscious and you come in and you do Sandplay with me, you won't go into your unconscious much. Yeah. There has to be a space, So I forget what I was going to say there. That's okay. That's all right. No problem. I do want you to actually just talk a bit about Carl Jung, if you wouldn't mind, because you've mentioned Jungian ideas, and obviously it's such an important. He was such an important part of it all. Without going through a kind of a Wikipedia entry, who was Carl Jung? He was this guy that grew up in Switzerland, gosh, he became a doctor. He had one of the things that he realized was that his father, who was a minister, wasn't really connected to God, didn't really believe what he was preaching.
Okay.
And there was something too about he had a nanny when he was young that was taken from him. And then his own mother connected with him again, something around that. But anyway, when he finished his medical studies, he decided to go into psychiatry. And he worked in a hospital in Zurich and developed some ideas around the unconscious. But he connected with Freud. And Freud is much, he separate. Everybody knows Freud, and not too many people know Jung. So you asked me who he was. He was this guy who he died in 1961, so fairly relatively recently, you know. And he developed a technique of looking at the unconscious, which he called analytical psychology. Freud called his method psychoanalysis. And Freud really liked Jung. And so, but they had disagreements about various things, and they eventually parted when they were on a trip in the States together. And they came down in the morning. They used to share their dreams.
Okay. And
dreams are another way of accessing the unconscious. And people in Sandplay therapy use the dreams as well. We work with those too. But Freud told Jung part of his dream, and then he wouldn't tell him the rest because he said, I might lose my authority over you. Now, the whole point of looking at the unconscious through dreams is to find a deeper truth, you know. And here Freud was saying, well, I might lose my authority over you if I tell you the truth about my dream. And that was the final nail in the coffin for Jung. He decided, and there were many other things about, you know, like Jung, maybe I can show you this diagram later.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Freud saw the unconscious as a bin where you throw in everything you don't like. Jung saw the unconscious as something to be explored that we do for the rest of our life. We're exploring the unconscious with a goal at the end of it, which is to bring the self to consciousness. That's the deeper part of our psyche. The self in Jung's terms was a place where we are at peace, and we all want that really, where we can love, if not unconditionally, well, a lot more unconditionally than if we're not there. And a place also where we are connected to the numinous. When we're really with the self, we have a sense of our life being part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have had these experiences of a temporary, if you like, connection with the self, when maybe in some beautiful natural surrounding, they have a sense, the beauty of it gets to them, and they lose their sense of their own self.
Yeah.
And they're sort of become one with what's around them. And that can happen maybe when a child is born as well. But so I forget what question you asked me again.
No, it's just to give just a brief description of Carl Jung, basically, just to kind of into the ideas, I guess, of Carl Jung. And it's funny, you do say about Freud, and everybody knows him, everybody knows the name, and Jung is obviously lesser known. I saw a film where the two of them were their friendship was explored, called A Dangerous Method, and it's quite an interesting film. It's Michael Fassbender's in it. It's very interesting. That was my introduction to Jung, because as like you say, I knew Freud and I didn't know who Jung was. That the diagram that you were talking about, if you can get that up, because I think obviously we talked a bit about, like, some people are better at seeing things, or some people are better at hearing things, but it's just an idea of what you're talking about with Jung and the psyche. So we'll just okay, so now I'll just tell the people who are listening on the podcast platforms, jump in at this time into the YouTube and have a look. Go ahead, Brendan.
So this is it's very handy to have diagrams to represent these psychological things, because they have no objectivity. So when you're looking at this, if you're on the left side of that screen, I don't know if you can see it. No, I don't have a pointer here. But if you're on the left side looking at it, at that midline, the line across the middle, imagine that's your birth. And when you are born as a human, you're considered to be in the uterus for the first year of life. And at the end of that year, you begin to realize that yourself and your mother are not the one person. Because when I said it's still in the uterus, the child, the 6-month-old child, feels itself to be part of the mother. It doesn't have an identity separate from itself. But from 6 months to a year, it begins to then identify itself as separate. And in an ideal situation, the sort of masculine energy of the mother or father comes into it and brings the child out into the world and starts encountering, has the adventure of going out into the world. And the child then, for the next few years, learns about boundaries between itself and others, in creches, then in school. The child becomes more conscious in puberty about sexuality. And as it grows up through the adolescence, maybe begins to mature in ways, begins to learn about kindness and compassion and jealousy and envy, begins to get familiar with their emotions, the boundaries between others, expectations, what society expects and all that kind of stuff. But by the time we'll say 20 to 30, we're very kind of diagrammatized situation to try and include as much as we can, but you develop an ego, a center of your conscious world, and you have a sense of who you are. And the who you are might be that I'm a musician. It might be that that I have an old car, which I'm very proud of. It might be that I have a job as a particular thing, as a teacher or a gardener, a doctor, whatever. But a sense of myself as a person. And associated with that, as you see in the diagram, there are these little masks, these little triangles around the ego. And these are the masks that we wear when dealing with other people. So that's the first half of life, if you like. And the second half of life is when we say get between 35 to 45. It can happen anytime from really 16 to 60, where we just get a sense that we're not going to achieve what we thought we would like to achieve, or we have achieved it. It doesn't matter which. But we just get a sense there's something else to life. And one of the things that comes in there is mortality. We don't think we're going to die really till we get into middle age and we realize death, we've seen it happen to people, and we begin to become clear that it's probably going to happen to us as well. And so the second half of life, we realize that the thrust of the first half of life to achieve something, achieve a status in society, is not the only thing that drives us. There's something deeper. And what the real journey of life then, if you like, is to connect with the self, that place I was talking about where you feel that you're at peace and I don't know how else to describe it. In order to do that, you do have to look at your own unconscious, which is there, and you have to look to some extent at the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious, the personal unconscious is all the unconscious things that have happened to you since you were born. Most people aren't conscious of their birth, but you can be helped to recall it using various techniques. And one therapy focuses on this, the idea being that if you had a difficult birth, it forms a template for how you will deal with problems in your life in general. Okay. And yes, and like if I ask you what you had for breakfast this morning, you remember. If I had asked you what you had for breakfast 3 weeks ago, you mightn't initially, and then you might remember, oh, that was the day something happened, I had no breakfast. So there's an example of something coming into consciousness that was unconscious before that. And all of what's happened to you is stored there in your personal unconscious. And some of the things that happened are traumatic psychological events. No one has had a perfect parent. And at various times, we will have had experiences that appear to us to be unjust, or appear to us to be unfair, or that shame us. And instead of dealing with them, we can't. We just pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So these kind of experiences are in there in our conscious, and we have to look at those. The collective unconscious, in Jung's terms, was to do with, we have a lot of psychological stuff that we inherit, and he called it these things that we inherit, the archetypes. And like the father archetype is I hope I'm not getting too confused here. Let's say a child knows how to walk. It knows that because it's a human being. Okay, a human being knows how to be a father. The basic structure, psychological structure for being a father is available to you because you're a human being. Even if you had no father, there would be something in you that would know how to relate as a father, because that humanity has learned that through millions of years of reproducing. But when the archetype is in the collective unconscious, but it finds expression in our lives by the activity of our personal father. So if I have a good experience of my father, that will make my father energy healthy and productive. And if my father has been a difficult person to be with, then I get the negative side of the archetype, because the archetype has both negative and positive fathers. And so my experience of the father archetype is through my father, but there's more in it than just what I get from my father.
Right.
And if I have had a negative experience from my father and I go to work on this, I can change that to a positive experience. I can see the other side of the archetype. If I make the negative piece conscious, fully conscious, and recognize, no, my father really shouldn't have been beating me every week that he came back from the pub, really seeing that clearly. And it's usually not as graphic as that. The thing will be more subtle.
Yeah.
When I have, if you like, the courage to look at the wounded side of my parents, then I don't carry them out or continue with them.
Yeah. And
I usually free myself from something. So I've left that on there long enough probably for you.
That's good. That's very good. Yeah, no, thank you.
Do you want to ask me anything about that?
Yeah, I guess the thing about that diagram, look, it's not just a diagram, it's just in general, is always the collective unconscious that has been confusing to me anyway. I can't obviously speak for everyone because I understand the personal unconscious, but the collective unconscious is something that seems to be would beyond me at the moment seem a bit over the top, do you think?
It's not easy to take on. Let me think if I can. Well, I don't know if this will help, but it's an example that we have access to information in the collective unconscious that we didn't learn through our own life experience. One example of this, to some extent, is the fact that a child can walk. It's a complex procedure. How does he know it? How does we develop? We have many skills that we're not actually told by our parents exactly how to do, but it does come up in Sandplay.
Yeah,
because people choose symbols that they have no experience themselves of. They have no idea what it means. But we know from that throughout history, this symbol has meant this.
Right.
And one quite dramatic example, I'd say, would be, the reason I remember this particular case is because I was talking about it when I was giving a talk down in Limerick a few weeks ago. And it was a woman who had a very bad experience with her mother.
Okay.
And she described, this would be tough for some people, I suppose, but anyway, she used a symbol of a crocodile to represent her mother. The reason being that the crocodile will eat its young. It will devour its young.
Yeah.
The male crocodile will do that as well. And that aspect of the psyche, say the devouring mother, is the mother or father who say want you to be what they want you to be. The better way to be is to nurture you so that you grow into what you can be, rather than you be something they want you to be. So in that extent, your psyche is kind of, the energy is taken out of it by a parent who wants you to be what they want you to be. And this lady, this was quite severe for this woman. And in the space of 5 sessions, she started using an elephant for the mother. She did exactly what you're talking about. She looked at her relationship with her mother and she began to see this wasn't right.
Yeah.
And then she saw the good side of it. She saw the woundedness of her mother and then the good side of the mother. And she started using the elephant as an object. And she didn't consciously say, this is my mother, but it was clear that it was. And it's well recognized in the Sandplay world that the elephant is the positive mother. The elephant, carries its in uterus for 2 years and feeds the young for 2 years. And the elephants form creches for the baby elephants. And the leader of a herd is often an old female.
Right.
And when this elephant appeared in this lady's work, the thing that she did next was went and visited her mother, who she hadn't seen for years, and they had a good connection.
Right, that's amazing.
It is. It's like it's almost too much. People will find it hard to believe, but it comes up again and again. Where these symbols, the client doesn't know what they mean, but it means what it means, and it shows in what they do.
Do you, and I know we've used depression in inverted commas, so we'll continue to do so for the purpose of the chat. And I guess I want to know, do you think that depression, inverted commas, can be overcome?
Can depression be overcome?
Yeah.
You might not like to hear this, but I would say depression can be a gift.
Okay.
It is a call to look at your unconscious. And when you deal with it, I know people who have suffered with depression for years and they've been medicated and all the rest. And I don't mean to take from their suffering and say it's something that it's not. But in my experience of my own suffering, if you like, and the suffering of people who work with me, and many clients would say that depression is a gift, that it opened them up to the psyche, the reality of the unconscious and the journey. That diagram we had, that diagram is relevant to everybody. Everybody has the possibility to find the self. And many people do without any sort of therapy or without getting depressed. They've been very fortunate. Siri is going to come in here. Sorry.
It's okay.
Put him off. Okay. So, yes, depression can definitely be overcome.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant, positive thing to put across. And I understand what you're saying about depression as a gift, because obviously there's a lot of days where I wouldn't have voiced it. But what I would say is, down the line or over the last few years, I've done things that I never would have done if I hadn't have faced certain challenges. You talk about struggles at the start of this episode. And I think when I talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or cold water swimming or all these kind of things, I wouldn't have done. There would be nothing that would have led me to it. And I could honestly say that 100% wouldn't have happened. So I know exactly what you mean. So when you do have a client come in, and I guess clients can come in for different reasons, many reasons. What is what's the ultimate goal for the client, or is it completely different on a kind of a case by case basis?
Yeah, it's I guess it's different. Sometimes it's a relationship that's not going well for them. Sometimes they're just very depressed. Sometimes it is something that has happened in the outer world that's very difficult, and they are depressed because of it.
Yeah.
And I would say they're suffering because of it. And this is normal. Like sometimes when I was in the hospital working, a surgeon, a patient who has got a diagnosis of a terminal malignancy, and they get very sad, and people start saying they're depressed. I mean, no, they're not depressed. They're suffering.
Yeah.
And you deal with that, and helping someone through the sadness that comes up for people whose life is coming to a clear end. It's really, so often it's an opportunity to open up, and many people do. And sometimes they don't, because one of the things, it doesn't really happen now, I don't think so much, but family who take, oh, don't tell him, he'll not be able to take it. Yeah. The reality is they're the ones that can't take it.
Yeah.
And the poor patient has to carry their inability to deal with the situation.
Yeah. I can get that. I understand that. So on a kind of a personal level, then, what do you like to do in your spare time when you aren't helping people?
I do a bit of walking, and I do a bit of taking photographs.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and do a bit of painting, and do a bit of sailing. I've done a bit of sailing over the years.
Oh, nice.
But I haven't done that recently.
You also do, I just want to add this in because I think it's something that I really want to do. And it's something that I've I did try it and I failed in the first attempt. But I didn't fail, I just didn't get it right. Meditation.
Oh, yeah.
That's very important to you.
Yes, it is. And, thanks for asking me that question, because I forgot about it myself. But I got into a meditation a lot in the last, I got involved with the TM people 40 years ago.
Right.
And I don't think we have time, but to make a long story short, I've been exposed to various forms of meditation over the years. But in the last 10 years, I got familiar with Eckhart Tolle, and I went to the States and did this School of Awakening stuff for 6 months. You go there for a week at the beginning and a week at the end, and you do online stuff. And he's talking about meditation, really. He brings meditation out of the meditation room into real life. And that's what it's about. And I've got so kind of taken with it in the last 5 years that, it leads you in the same direction as the Jungian work, as exploring your own unconscious. Meditation, when you integrate a lot of your unconscious material and you find the self theory, that process is called individuation in Jungian terms. And individuation is kind of like, it seems to me to be like the awakening process that they talk about for meditation, And yeah.
I think, sorry, I just want to pop in here just because I want to get your opinion on it, really. I've tried it a couple of times, and I just sat down and just, it is one of those things that people have said to me, well, just I try not to think. And if you try not to think, you think. And it's, when, not even so much when you started, but when you're sitting down now, is it just a case of, well, what is it a case of? Without me asking you the question, when you sit down to meditate, where does your mind go?
How much time have you got left?
You got a few minutes. You're glad.
Because what I do sometimes with people is I just bring them through a quick meditation so that they know what we're talking about. Even if they haven't experienced, they'll kind of know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Would you have time for that?
Are you going to talk through it?
Yeah, up to a point. Then I just leave you alone for about 2 minutes.
I don't know if that will work for a podcast. I think they'll probably. But listen, I think the whole point of me asking about the meditation really is because I know people who talk about meditation. They're so high on meditation and how important it is to them and how much it helps them. And again, when you've spoken about suffering, if you can find something that is the mindfulness, because it's funny, I was just listening to you talk about the things that you like to do, and it's walking and taking photographs, and they're all very, I imagine this mindful kind of idea to them. And there's something, and it's something in the way that you are, and the way that you speak, there's a kind of quiet calm about you, which is very reassuring. And I like the idea of retraining the brain when it comes to meditation. I think that's kind of, I suppose that's what I'm trying to get at with you is like, was there a retraining program when you started meditation?
I really think I get meditation now in a way that I didn't.
Okay.
I'm trying to explain to you. Most of the time we are thinking. And meditation, there's TM meditation. The idea of TM meditation is that you focus on a mantra. But I spent some time in a Buddhist monastery, and we did chanting for long periods. And the chanting is like a meditation.
Okay. And
if you're a Thich Nhat Hanh fan, he'll tell you, just look at the flower, wash the dishes, and focus on what you're doing. But the common purpose of all these is to stop you thinking.
Okay.
Because we are thinking all of the time. And that ego that we mentioned in the diagram, if that was to be focused on one thing, it's on the thinking part of your mind, the piece that's going on all the time. And it is not unreasonable to say, I suffer because I think. And this fellow Descartes who said, I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
He would have been better off to say, I stopped thinking, therefore I am. And what I would have done with you is get you to focus on your breathing.
Right.
Just be aware of your breathing breathing in and out. And we'll say at the end of the out breath, there's a gap because you're not breathing. So if you're using, first of all, if you're repeating the word, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out, that's a mantra. Then at a deeper level, you're just aware of the breathing. And then when the breathing stops, you're not aware of anything. You're not thinking, you're not breathing. There's a space there, an empty space. And in that space, you are still aware, but you're not focused on anything. And that's the essence of meditation, to find that space and to stick with it. And the more you do that, the more you see that most of the thoughts you have are really quite negative.
Right.
Yes.
I'm really, I've tried so many things from different guests have come on and we've talked about different things. And obviously I'm going to try the Sandplay therapy with you, and definitely going to try and get back into the meditation because it only sounds like positive to me. Brendan, where can people find you?
I'm balance slow.
Have you got a website or?
Yes. Sandplay. My website is sandplayireland.com.
Okay.
And there's a mechanism on that by which you can book to talk to me.
Oh, right. Okay. And what I'll do is when this episode comes out on Wednesday morning, I will link the website to it so people will be able to click into it there. Brendan, you've been a brilliant guest, very informative, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
No, absolutely. I'm all here for those kind of things. But can you stick with me for 2 minutes? I'll close it out. I just want to get a photo with you, if that's okay.
Okay.
Brilliant. Obviously, I want to say thanks as well to John for all his technical stuff. The people who helped me put this podcast together, my mom, my dad, my granddad, Jung, Calvin. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you would. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, we're all on there. And the podcast platforms are Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google Podcasts, etc. As always, thank you very much for everyone for tuning in. And once again, Brendan, thanks a lot.
Yeah, my privilege. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we will see you next week. Take care. Bye.